HOA fined me for revving my engine, but I was filming a scene for a major movie. The engine roar ripped through the quiet neighborhood like a war cry. The low, guttural sound of finely tuned horsepower reverberated off the manicured lawns, shattering the suburban silence. And then bang, bang, bang. A fist hammered against the hood of my car. I killed the ignition. The echoes of the engine still lingered in the air as I stepped out, face to face with Helen Grayson, HOA president and professional pain in my ass. Even in the dim glow of the streetlights, I could see the sheer rage twisting her face. A few porch lights flickered across the street, shadowy figures peeking through blinds, watching. "Helen," I said, keeping my voice level. "Good evening. Don't you Helen me, you arrogant prick." She spat, practically shaking. "This is the third noise complaint this month, and I am done. This bullshit is a direct violation of HOA rules." I glanced around, eyes scanning the scene. A few other HOA board members loomed behind her, arms crossed, nodding in self-important agreement. Behind them, a neighbor in a bathrobe was filming on his phone. "Helen," I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "Do you even know what's happening here? I know that you think this place is your goddamn racetrack." She seethed. "I know that every time you rev that ridiculous overcompensation of a car, you make everyone else suffer. And I know that you're about to get hit with the biggest fine this HOA has ever given." I grinned. "Sounds serious." Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny, Carter?" "Kind of," I admitted. "That's because you don't understand what's about to happen," she hissed, stepping closer, voice dropping to something cold, measured. "Do you want to play games? Fine. But you just fucked with the wrong person." I leaned against the hood of my car, arms crossed. "Oh yeah. You see this?" She waved a thick folder in my face. "Every single violation you've committed. Every complaint. Every bullshit stunt you've pulled. And I just got board approval to escalate. Not just fines, Carter." She leaned in, a slow smile creeping across her face. "I can have you evicted." Silence. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of crickets. The board members behind her stiffened, waiting for my reaction. The guy filming zoomed in. I let the words hang between us before slowly exhaling. "You're serious?" "As a fucking heart attack." I tilted my head, giving her one last chance to walk it back. "You know," I said casually, "there's a saying in my industry. You never call cut too early. You let the scene play out, because if you don't, spare me the goddamn Hollywood wisdom." She snapped. I sighed. "Right then. Guess we're doing this now." Helen smirked. "You're damn right we are." And that's when the SUV pulled up. Blacked out windows. Silent engine. The kind of vehicle that doesn't belong in a suburban nightmare like this. The door swung open, and a Hollywood legend stepped out. Helen froze. The board members stared. The man in the bathrobe muttered, "Holy shit." I stepped forward, arms wide. "Helen," I said, barely suppressing a grin. "Meet my director." "Got it." We're keeping the heat fully turned up. No slowing down. No softening the tension. This part will ramp up the war between Alex and Helen, making every encounter feel like a battle with higher and higher stakes. Here's the next 1,200 words in full cinematic, pro-level scriptwriting style. The next evening, the war room was set, otherwise known as the HOA board meeting. Fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, flickering slightly, casting a cold, sterile glow over the community center's polished wood floors. The room smelled like stale coffee and fake authority. Everyone was here. Helen sat at the center of the table, queen of her castle, flanked by her minions, 3 other board members, each with identical smirks and clipboards. They looked like they had just finished drinking the same Kool-Aid. Across from them, me, alone. The rest of the room was packed with spectators, neighbors sitting stiffly in metal chairs, murmuring, whispering. The tension had spread beyond just Helen and me. The entire damn community was choosing sides. Helen cleared her throat, leaning forward, eyes practically dripping with condescension. "Let's get started, shall we?" I tapped my fingers on the table, waiting. "We are here to discuss the numerous infractions committed by Alex Carter," she announced, looking around the room as if she were delivering a State of the Union address. "Violations include noise disturbances, unauthorized use of property, disruptive behavior, and a complete disregard for the integrity of this community. A few nods. A few murmurs. I exhaled, leaning back. Big words, Helen. She flipped a page in her binder, unfazed. We take violations seriously, Carter. You've already been fined multiple times. Yet, you continue to treat this place like your own personal playground. I smirked. And yet, I'm still here. Her eyes flashed. Not for long. She slid a folder toward me. A fat one. The HOA rulebook, printed out complaints, legal forms, all stacked together like a brick of bureaucratic bullshit. We're moving forward with an official petition to revoke your residency. The room reacted. Gasps. Murmurs. A few hushed. Is that even legal? Whispers. I slowly dragged the folder toward me, flipping it open, skimming. The words on the page were weaponized. Carefully worded legalese traps designed to snare me in red tape. I let out a low chuckle. Eviction. That's bold. On what grounds? Helen leaned in, smile razor-sharp. Because you're a nuisance. That you refuse to abide by the rules. You've created an unsafe environment for our peaceful, law-abiding residents. My grin widened. Oh, sweetheart, I said, voice just loud enough for the crowd to hear. You don't get to play the safety card while half this neighborhood still has their Christmas lights up in March. A chuckle from somewhere in the back. A sharp glare from Helen. You think this is funny? She snapped. Honestly. I shrugged. Kind of. Helen's jaw clenched. You don't belong here, Carter. There it was. The thing she had been too careful to say outright before. The real grudge. It wasn't just about noise or fines. It was about who I was. I wasn't one of them. I sat up straight, letting my voice carry. You ever notice, I said casually, that every single person you go after doesn't fit your picture of perfect suburban life? Helen stiffened. I pointed toward the audience. Last year, it was the young couple renting the townhouse. What did you say? Bringing down property values? The year before that, it was Jamal and his family. Something about excessive foot traffic. Right? And now me. The room shifted. The crowd was listening now. Helen forced a laugh. Oh, please. Do you think this is some grand conspiracy? I think, I said, tapping the folder, that you're really good at pretending this is about rules when it's actually about control. Silence. For the first time in a long time, Helen didn't have a snappy comeback. And that's when I dropped the hammer. I pulled a single stapled document from my jacket and slid it across the table. Helen glanced at it, paused. Then her face drained of color. She knew exactly what she was looking at. I folded my arms. Go ahead, read it out loud for the class. She didn't. The crowd shifted again. More whispers. I leaned in, voice low, lethal. That's a legal injunction, I said. See, Helen, you might run this neighborhood, but you don't run the state. And the state says you've been engaging in selective enforcement, illegal fining practices, and potential discrimination. Helen's mouth opened, closed. I sat back, letting it sink in. You're a lawyer, right? You know how bad this looks. Silence. Then, finally, she hissed, this isn't over. I grinned. No, it's not. The next week was hell. Helen didn't back down. She doubled down. A second fine arrived in the mail, this time for violating community decorum. A random safety inspection was scheduled for my property. A letter from an anonymous concerned resident warned me that people were talking. A petition started circulating, trying to get me removed from the community. They wanted to drown me in bullshit. And then, Helen made her next move. A week later, I woke up to find a bright orange notice slapped onto my garage door, signed by the HOA, stating that my garage could no longer be used for commercial activities. They were trying to shut down my job. I stood there, hands on my hips, staring at the pathetic little piece of paper. And then I laughed, because Helen had just fucked up. Big time. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally cut off my legs. But what she didn't know was that I had already prepared for this. I pulled out my phone and made one call. 30 minutes later, a blacked-out SUV rolled up in front of my house. The door opened, and my studio's legal team stepped out. Helen was about to find out the hard way that she had just messed with the wrong guy. Got it. We're cranking the heat up even higher. This is where the war explodes. Helen's last desperate power plays, legal retaliation, and the moment she thinks she's won, only to realize she's walked straight into a trap. Helen stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, a smug little vulture grin on her face as I ripped the cease and desist notice off my garage door. "Morning, Carter," she called sweetly. I ignored her, crumpled the paper in my fist, tossed it into my car's open window. Helen took a deliberate step forward. "You know," she mused, "it's amazing what the HOA can do when the community is in agreement." I turned, leaning against my car, arms crossed, waiting. She took her time, savoring every second, like a cat playing with its food. "We had an emergency board vote last night," she said. "We agreed, unanimously, that your garage violates community policies. That's strike 3. I raised an eyebrow. And she said, delivering the kill shot, "We're pursuing a forced lien." The whole world went quiet. For a full 5 seconds, I just stared at her. A lien. Not just fines. Not just a slap on the wrist. A direct financial attack. They were trying to take my house. Helen tilted her head, studying me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give her one. Instead, I let out a slow breath. "Wow, that's all you have to say," she taunted. "Wow." I pushed off the car, grabbed my phone, and dialed a number. Helen smirked. "Calling your lawyer?" "Nah," I said. "Calling the studio." Her smile flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough. She wasn't stupid. She knew I had money behind me. She just didn't know how much. Yet, the next 72 hours were pure hell. Helen wasn't just swinging for the fences. She was burning them down. Then, the HOA took it to the next level. Friday morning, I stepped outside to find a tow truck backing into my driveway. "What the fuck?" I marched over. The driver barely looked at me. Order from the HOA. Unauthorized commercial vehicle on residential property. I turned. Helen stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, watching. The pure, unfiltered satisfaction on her face made my blood boil. "You're seriously trying to tow my car?" I asked, voice deadly calm. Helen smirked. "Rules are rules." I took one slow step forward. "Touch my car," I said, voice low, "and I swear to God, I'll bury you in so much paperwork. Your great-grandkids will be getting cease and desist letters." The tow driver hesitated. Helen's smirk twitched. And then, from behind me, "Mr. Carter?" I turned. A news van had pulled up across the street. The camera crew was stepping out. A reporter adjusts her mic. Helen's smile died. My grin returned. "Excellent timing," I said, gesturing to the tow truck. "Because of this? This is about to get interesting." By that evening, the neighborhood had officially become a war zone. Half the community backed Helen. Older residents, bored retirees, the kind of people who thought HOA power trips were a goddamn Olympic sport. The other half backed me. Younger families, people who had secretly hated Helen's reign for years, but were too afraid to push back. The whole thing spread like wildfire. The video of the tow truck showdown hit 50,000 views overnight. A petition against the HOA's abuse of power started circulating. And then came the moment Helen truly lost control. I should have seen it coming. Saturday morning, I was in my garage, calmly detailing my car, when the sound of sirens tore through the air. A police cruiser rolled up to my driveway. 2 officers stepped out. Helen was right behind them. Her expression? Pure victory. "Oh, she thinks she's won." I set the rag down. Turned slowly. One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we got a report of an unregistered commercial operation being run from this property." "Bullshit," I said before I could stop myself. The officer frowned. Helen sighed dramatically. "Officers," she said, "we've had numerous complaints. This individual has repeatedly ignored community guidelines, and we have legal documentation proving his violations." I exhaled through my nose. She had escalated to law enforcement. Tried to paint me as some criminal. I forced a smile. "You got a warrant." One of the officers hesitated. The other glanced at Helen. "Ah, so that's how she played it. She made it sound serious enough to get them out here, without actually having legal grounds. She was bluffing." I pulled out my phone. "Cool. Since you're already here, you mind sticking around for a minute?" Helen frowned. "What?" I hit dial. "Hey," I said, voice casual. "Yeah, Tell him to roll up now. Helen stiffened. Who are you calling? I smiled. My legal team. Exactly 60 seconds later, a black SUV pulled up. Helen's face went white. The back door opened, and out stepped 2 studio lawyers and my director. The officers looked at them, then at me, then at Helen. And suddenly, this wasn't looking like such a great move for her. One of the lawyers stepped forward, handing a thick legal packet to the officers. You want to take a look at this? The lead cop flipped through it. His face darkened. Helen swallowed. That's right, lady. You just fucked up. Absolutely. Now we're going all in, no holding back. This is where Helen's empire crumbles. The community turns on her, and the truth explodes in her face, in front of everyone. This is the final war. And Helen looked like she was about to shit bricks. The lead cop flipped through the thick legal packet my lawyer had handed him, his expression darkening with every page. This, he muttered, brow furrowing. This isn't just a complaint. No, it's not, my lawyer said smoothly. What you're holding is a formal legal counteraction, including documented evidence of the HOA's pattern of selective enforcement, financial coercion, and direct harassment. Helen's breath hitched. That's ridiculous. The lawyer didn't even look at her. Oh, and that cease you guys just put on my client's garage? He tapped a page. Legally unenforceable. Also, per California law, attempting to financially strong-arm a homeowner under false pretenses is grounds for a civil lawsuit. Helen paled. The cops looked at each other. Oh, Helen, you thought this was your grand victory. You had no idea you were the one being set up. The second the cops turned toward Helen, people started coming out of their houses. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, whispering. A few raised their phones, filming. Helen saw them. She knew. The real battle wasn't just legal. It was public, and she was about to lose both. Helen straightened, desperation leaking into her voice. This is a goddamn circus. Officers, I don't know what he told you, but this is a simple case of a resident refusing to follow the rules. The lead cop sighed. Ma'am, if this were just about a noise complaint, I wouldn't be standing here reading a case file thicker than my goddamn mortgage agreement. Helen's mouth snapped shut. Not to mention, he turned to me. Sir, your lawyer here says this involves a major film production? I grinned. Yeah, I said. Have you ever heard of director Michael Stanton? The officer frowned. Yeah, of course. Cool. Meet Michael Stanton. I stepped aside, letting my director step forward. The crowd gasped. Helen froze. And Michael just smiled. Officer, he said, tone smooth. Our production has been under contract with Mr. Carter for the past 6 months. The garage you try to shut down? That's an official studio-sanctioned film set. Every engine rev you find him for? That was an active recording session for a movie scene. More murmurs. A couple of neighbors' eyes widened. Michael clasped his hands. Now, I don't know if Ms. Grayson here is aware, but under state law, interfering with the legally sanctioned film production is... He smiled wider. What's the phrase I'm looking for? The lawyer leaned in. A crime. Helen visibly swayed. And just like that, the floodgates broke. One of the younger residents, Mark, the guy with the twin toddlers, stepped forward, arms crossed. Wait, he said. You mean all these complaints, all these fines were over a fucking movie shoot? Murmurs turned into angry whispers. Helen looked around, realizing too late that she had just lost the room. And then, one of the older ladies in the back, Mrs. Ramirez, who had lived here for 20 years, spoke up. You know, she said, voice cold, I always wondered why every time someone new moved in, you always had a problem with them. Helen whipped around. Excuse me? I mean, Mrs. Ramirez continued, louder now, addressing the crowd. Does anyone remember the last time Helen went after someone who deserved it? Heads turned. Mark scoffed. Not to mention, she lets Paul down the street throw drunken karaoke parties every weekend. But Alex revs an engine a few times, and suddenly it's the end of the world? People nodded. Helen's smugness cracked. I leaned in. Looks like the neighborhood doesn't have your back anymore, Helen. Helen snapped. Oh, shut the hell up, all of you. She screeched, voice shaking. You people are idiots. You let this Hollywood asshole walk in here and just ruin everything. She turned on me. This isn't a goddamn movie, Carter. She spat. You can't just charm your way out of this. I took a step forward. I don't need to, I said, voice deadly calm. Helen blinked. And then, my lawyer held up another document. This, he said, is a petition, signed by over 80% of the homeowners here, requesting your immediate removal from the HOA board. Helen's face drained of color. No. Yes. The lawyer smiled. And since the bylaws require only 60% to make it official, congratulations, Helen. You're out. Silence. A pin-drop silence. Helen stumbled back. I know. No. You can't do this. Mark stepped forward. We just did. The cops gave Helen one last, long look. Then the lead officer sighed. Ma'am, at this point, you might want to call a lawyer. Helen froze. The crowd started muttering again. Neighbors shook their heads, disgusted. And me? I just smiled. Because I had won. The night was quiet again. Mark walked over, hands in his pockets. So, he grinned. That was a hell of a show. I shrugged. Hollywood, baby. He laughed. So, what happens next? I exhaled. Done. I looked around. But I think this neighborhood just got a whole lot quieter. He nodded. For what it's worth. I'm glad you didn't back down. I smirked. I never do. Absolutely. This is the grand finale, the fallout, the final reckoning, and the lasting consequences of the war between Alex and Helen. This isn't just about winning. This is about changing the game forever. Let's finish this fight in full Hollywood blockbuster style. The neighborhood was buzzing. The morning sun cut through the crisp air, but the usual calm of the suburb was replaced with murmurs, hushed voices, and stolen glances. Helen's downfall had spread like wildfire. The entire HOA board had been forced into an emergency meeting without her. Why? Because the community had turned. Last night, after Helen's total collapse, the floodgates had opened. Residents dug up old fines, old grievances, old vendettas. People who had been too scared to speak up before, they weren't scared anymore. The petition against Helen? It had quadrupled overnight. And this morning, as I sipped my coffee on my front porch, I watched as Helen, the self-proclaimed queen of this neighborhood, walked out of her house, wearing oversized sunglasses and a permanent scowl. The woman who had spent years lording over this community like a dictator was now the one being whispered about. Helen stomped toward her car, clearly trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. But karma had one last gift for her. Right as she reached her door, Mark, the neighbor she used to ignore, called out, "Morning, Helen. It's a beautiful day for a resignation, huh?" Laughter rippled across the street. Helen froze. Her grip on her keys tightened. "Fuck off." Another voice, Mrs. Ramirez, chimed in. "Now, Helen, that's not very neighborly." More laughter. Helen's face burned red. She yanked open her car door, practically throwing herself inside. And then, as she slammed the door shut, a single sheet of paper fluttered off her windshield. She snatched it up, scanned it, and her face crumpled. Even from across the street, I could see what it was. Her official removal notice. Effective immediately. She had lost everything. The HOA. Gone. Her reputation? Torched. Her power? Erased like a bad script revision. And me? I just smiled. That evening, the HOA board gathered in the same sterile community center that had once been Helen's kingdom. But this time, she wasn't there. I leaned back in my chair, watching the cleanup. The board, now scrambling to save face, was officially rolling back dozens of Helen's insane rules. The ridiculous noise ordinance, revoked. The bullshit fines she had issued over the years, refunded. The tow truck policy, gone. And then came the kicker. Mrs. Ramirez stood up and cleared her throat. "I would like to make a motion," she said, voice steady, "that from now on, no single HOA member can wield absolute power over the board. All decisions must go through a majority community vote." A few of Helen's old loyalists shifted uncomfortably. But the room erupted in agreement. Mark smirked at me. "You just started a fucking revolution, man." I chuckled. All in a day's work. A week passed. The dust settled. Helen, she vanished. Rumor was, she listed her house for sale. Probably couldn't stomach living in the same place. She lost everything. Me, I finally had peace. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like I belonged here. Mark and a few other neighbors swung by my driveway, beer in hand, officially welcoming me to the neighborhood. This is the first time, Mark admitted, that this place has felt like a real community. I raised my bottle to finally being able to rev my damn engine in peace. They laughed, clinking bottles. And just like that, the war was over. But here's the thing. Helen? She wasn't just one bad HOA president. She was a symbol, a warning. And after this whole mess blew up online, something wild happened. Other neighborhoods started reaching out, asking how we managed to take her down. HOA watchdog groups picked up the story. Even some reporters started sniffing around. Turns out, Helen wasn't unique. There were HOAs all across the country pulling the same corrupt bullshit. And now, people knew how to fight back.